Welcome back to the final hour of the Gary Sutton Show here on News Radio 910 WSBA, where it's going to be your turn to make the call. And 1-800-357-0910 is our number. You can email me at gary.sutton@cumulus.com. You can also check out at facebook.com/910WSBA some of the clips we put up the last couple of days that we thought were pretty good. And I'm going to put this clip up today, and it's based on what Dr. Urschel said a moment ago. We were talking about Robin Williams. In the wake of the Robin Williams death this week, a lot of people have been talking about depression, and they've been talking about addiction and how to deal with those kind of things, what not to do, what to do. For a long, long time, and I want to ask you this question. How many of you have had to deal with depression? Were you worried how people would look at it when you dealt with it? Were you worried that people would know about it? Were you worried that people would somehow scorn you or ostracize you or push you away? Did you have anything like that ever happen to you and having to deal with any kind of depression, whether it was bipolar disorder or whether it was mild depression or severe depression? Do you feel, some of you that are listening out there today, you heard Dr. Urschel for the last half hour, do you feel that depression is a weakness or is it a disease? 1-800-357-0910. This is something that affects a lot of people in this country. When you dealt with it, was shame or concern involved? I'd like to hear some real stories from you this morning out there, whether you've had people in your family that have had to deal with it. And a lot of people will say, oh, it's just a cop-out for something else. You're just weak. Or you really, you're not able to handle the things that are around you. You're not a strong person and so forth. I'm going to tell you something this hour that I've never told you before. And for a long time, my bosses would say, don't ever say this because, you'd lose listeners and so forth. No, I don't think so. I'm going to tell you something that I've never shared before. I normally don't share a ton about my personal life, but I am a person who has dealt with depression. I still deal with it. All right. And at one point in time, about 13 years ago, I dealt with some really severe depression. I was never suicidal or any of that kind of thing, but I was in a low point in my life. Flat out, bottom level, to the point that I actually admitted myself to a place for a day where I thought I had to go to get help. And I spent probably the 2 longest days of my life ever in a facility that I went to with the help of a good friend who was a doctor to see what I could do to get help, because I was experiencing the kinds of things I had never experienced before. I've always been a person that's been very strong and felt like I could control everything in my life. Okay, I felt like, geez, I'm indestructible. I think a lot of us go through that, don't we? I'm indestructible. There's nothing that can get to me, nothing that can tear me down, nothing I can't overcome. And that's the kind of person I have tried to be pretty much most of my adult life anyway, and then most of my life. But I remember when I was a kid and I used to experience these moments of blackness and darkness, and I would go to my mom. I couldn't understand what they were, and I'd tell her about it, and she was always very caring and very understanding about it. And yet at the same time, I didn't understand them, and they'd always fade away, and I'd come back to myself, and they'd be short. But about 13 or 14 years ago, I started to have feelings that were much more serious than that, all right? And I didn't know what they were. Because, again, when you've been a person who's been pretty strong throughout your life and you feel like, geez, you're indestructible, there's nothing that can get to you, right? So when I went to the doctor said, I want you to go talk to somebody about depression. And I can remember seeing Robert De Niro analyze this, and he says, depression? No, it's not depression. I'm a strong person. It can't be depression. Well, that was my attitude. And yet when I went, they said, you have shortages of serotonin. Do you have this in your family? I said, well, some members of my family have had it, but I'm not sure it really is. That's what it is. I was like a lot of society was, where I said, come on. It's just a cop-out for something else. But it wasn't. And I was experiencing, like really lonely, black kinds of feelings that I had never experienced before in my life. And all of a sudden had just come on. And for periods of time where I'd be in a room, for example, at a doctor's office, and I'd have to get out of that room, almost felt claustrophobic. So I went to get help at this place, and it was away from here. It was actually it felt like 2 weeks. It was actually like a day and a half I was there. But I watched people who were super dependent on this place, and I watched people who couldn't help themselves, and I sat there, I said, that's not me. I think I can help myself, but I got to find the right path. And I stayed. I could voluntarily leave anytime I wanted to because I voluntarily went into it. But I stayed, and I went through group sessions, and I went through individual sessions, and I finally met with a doctor the next day. That's why I stayed overnight. And the idea that, they would lock the doors in front of you, lock the doors behind you when you left, and you had to have somebody opening doors. It was amazing to me because I'm a very independent person. We talk about independence all the time. So it was the worst thing in the world for me, and yet I fought to stay there, to talk to the doctor next day to get help. What can I do? And so he sent me to a psychologist and to a psychiatrist when I got back again 13 years ago now. And I can remember the day that my brother came to pick me up, and that doctor, I just left him, and he said, this is not the right place for you. And the worst thing for people who are experiencing depression, and you read this a lot about Robin Williams this week, is the idea of hopelessness, that this will always be the same thing and you can never, ever do anything about it. Well, you can. Okay, for all you people who suffer from that, you can. Okay, I still take a small dose of stuff every single day. Okay, in the morning when I get up. Okay, it builds up over a period of time. There are shortages. There are sicknesses where depression is there, and it does run in families. So if someone tries to tell you it doesn't, it does. You just heard the doctor saying it a moment ago. And I was actually talking to him about this off the air, which is where I got the courage today to be able to say this to you. And if you decide for some reason that you wouldn't listen to me because I'm telling you something honestly about myself that might help other people, then that's a decision you would have to make. I hope that that's not the kind of ignorance we still have in this country, that we do realize that there are illnesses out there. I'm one who didn't recognize it as an illness at first. I recognized it as the very thing that society used to do as a weakness. My wife has had the greatest response to what I said one day about this. When I experienced it one time, my wife, I had an episode where I was really depressed, and my wife hugged me, and she said, at the end, I said, I'm really, really sorry, because it was the first time it happened to us as a couple. And she said, don't be sorry. She said, it makes you human. She said, you've always been a really strong person. It makes you human. And you have to deal with that. We all have things we have to deal with, sicknesses and other maladies in our lives and other challenges. It makes you human. And that was one of the greatest things that ever helped me. So I'm telling you, I've had and I have depression, okay? It's not something that I use as a cop-out. If you've heard me, you know me, you talk to me, you've seen me or met me before. And I'm not saying this as a dig me, and I'm not saying as anything else. I'm just saying it's kind of being open and transparent and telling you about something that we've all had to deal with. Maybe not all of us, but maybe we've dealt with it as a family member, not understanding it. Because I remember the day that I went to the hospital, and my mother said to me, let me go with you. I said, no, this is something I have to deal with myself. And I went alone, and I had to deal with myself, and it was hard. It was really hard. And there's a lonely feeling that comes with it many, many times, even if you're amidst friends. But you eventually have to deal with it somehow yourself. So when you talk about this morning, when you talk about having dealt with it, or maybe you're sitting there and you're having some of those feelings and you don't know what to do with it, give us a call here. Talk a little bit about it here on the Gary Sutton Show. I'm not a doctor. I don't pretend to be that. But there are places that you can go to get help, and I can tell you that it is something you can overcome, and there is something good on the other side, having gone through that, and remembering that one day, a day and a half, where I hit the rock bottom of what I thought was my life, and since then it has been nothing but going up and up and up and up. Okay, it's not to say you don't have moments where things are hurting, but we have that in so many parts of our lives and other things too, don't we? So 1-800-357-0910 on the Gary Sutton Show. You can react to that, or you can react to situations that you've had and want to talk about. I think we lost one caller. I'm sorry for going on for so long, but give us a call back. We'll get you in here. 1-800-357-0910. Let's go to Nate in Shrewsbury. Nate, you're on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Good morning, Nate. Your turn to make the call.
Good morning, Gary. Thanks for having Dr. Herschel on. Carol and I were sitting here going right on with everything he was saying. Back in the 1970s, Carol became what it turns out to be a diagnosis of bipolar.
Right.
She was extreme manic, is what it was. And again, this is in the early 1970s.
If I can stop you just for a second, Nate, explain what that means to a lot of people that don't understand those terms. Because I know it used to be called schizophrenia. It's now called bipolar. And when you say about manic, explain to people what that meant.
Well, manic is the excited side of it. It's when a person is out of control, speaking unreasonably, actions that to them make sense, but to the rest of us are not considered reasonable actions. That's a short definition of it. When you first saw that, okay, how did you react? I was just shocked. This was not, I clearly would not have married a gal that was like this. Natural reaction, right? Natural reaction that any of us would have. Yeah, no, retrospectively, we learned a lot. A lot. First of all, it took us almost 5 years to get a proper diagnosis. That's downright scary. Yep. And to get on treatment that was stable. What really pulled the trigger on this thing was postpartum depression in its acute form. She, in other words, a lot of ladies have, they go through an emotional spin at about the 5 to 6 month time frame. Right. And Carol, it was wow. And there was also a distraction, and the baby that we'd had passed away. Oh my God! So there was there was a whole string of distractions in there that kept us not focused on going to what's really going on here. We didn't know how much of it was an emotional reaction to the loss of the baby against chemistry and so forth. So a lot of distraction associated with it. And as I said, it took us, it felt like forever, 5 years, to come up with a proper diagnosis. The things that we learned during that period of time were one size does not fit all. If there's anything, and Dr. Herschel said that. He said each patient is unique. That was one of the things he said, and it's so right on. One size of treatment does not fit all. And that is one lesson that we really learned out of this. We had another break in about 88 or so, and again it was the same thing. We didn't recognize what was going on, that it was really the postpartum depression causing this, and we had a child, and sure enough, 5.5 months later, bingo! Postpartum depression hit again, yeah. Yeah, the super manic, and ended up with another time in the hospital. Again, this is difficult to talk about, but I understand. It's important that people understand that there's a lot of stuff that contributes to this, and not everybody's going to be the same, but they have to recognize what's going on, and if they care about the person that they love, they got to hang in there, and it's hard. I'm glad now. I mean, our son is grown and gone and married and stuff like that, and Carol's got a very interesting set of medications that she takes, but it works, and she's stable and able to function on a day-to-day basis. And that's great. And I imagine you learned a ton as a person and as a couple during that time about your relationship too. Absolutely. We learned a lot. Sounds like we're coming up on a break. Nate, we are coming up on a break, but I'll tell you what, you gave us a great start here today. Thank you so much for your openness, and glad to hear she's doing well, and glad to hear you both are doing well, and that's so important, and we'll talk again. Thanks again, my friend. Thank you. Bye-bye. Nate in Shrewsbury. And we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about depression. And have you had someone in your family that's dealt with that, and maybe you changed your whole attitude? Have you had it yourself? And do you have some signs that maybe you say, geez, where can I go? One of the things that when you hear about people that are depressed, self included, geez, I'll be like this forever and I can never change it. Not true. Not true. All right. 3 lines open. If you're trying to get in before, 1-800-357-0910. We'll come back and get Louisa in Shrewsbury, and we'll get you here on the Gary Sutton Show on News Radio 910 WSBA. Talking about depression here on the Gary Sutton Show this morning, and addictions in the wake of the Robin Williams death this week, that it seemed to be a conversation piece on so many different levels for a lot of people. And I told you the story this morning about my own battles with depression that I had starting about 13, 14 years ago, and probably even before that, but really recognized it as acute 13 to 14 years ago. And just got a nice little tweet. You can tweet me at Gary G. Sutton from a listener who said, thanks for sharing your story. Depression robs you of who you are.
people are not themselves when they are depressed. So glad you shared. It tries to rob you, but you don't have to be robbed, okay? You can deal with it, and there is hope, and I think that was the part of the Dr. Urschel interview that we had up earlier this morning. We'll put that up, by the way, Dr. Urschel's interview, we'll put that up tomorrow on Facebook. But you're welcome to call in. I want to hear from you, and this is an important time for sharing this week on, have you dealt with people with depression? And did you think it was somehow a weakness or a flaw in their character? Like Nate said a moment ago, he said, I just was surprised. He said, I've never married someone like this. And then all of a sudden, over years, he learned, because and one thing he didn't say, I think, is that love kind of helped him through. Because if you love somebody, then you love them flaws and all. Okay, but they're not flaws. There's a sickness there. And would we deal with any other sickness differently out of love? No. Someone had cancer, someone had some diabetes or whatever it might be. Wouldn't we still deal with them in a loving way? 1-800-357-0910. I'd love to hear you get involved in this morning. I know some people are getting uncomfortable about this. I've been uncomfortable for a long time because I have never shared that with you. And I thought today, for some reason, there was a voice there from Dr. Urschel Day that kind of got to me. And I said, there's nothing wrong with sharing that. I think people do understand that it's a sickness, so I hope they do. But maybe you still have a tough time dealing with that. Maybe you dealt with some family members, and share your story this morning. It may help other people. 1-800-357-0910 to Louisa in Shrewsbury. You're on the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Good morning, Louisa.
This is Louisa from Dillsburg.
Oh, okay. They had Shrewsbury up here, so I wasn't aware of that.
I don't think Brian recognized my voice this morning. I want to tell you, you always have your pulse on the nation, and with this Robin Williams thing, this has really come to the forefront, and your doctor was right on. And Gary, I want to thank you so much for your personal testimony, and I knew there was some reason why I've been your radio friend for many years. Now I know the connection. I spent 3 months in a mental hospital for postpartum depression back in 1955. Now, yours is a day and a half. Mine is a sort of longer story.
Right.
And then I had 3 months of outpatient, and I had 48 shock treatments.
Wow.
Now, that was back in 59 years ago. Now, in 1981, 33 years ago, my beautiful 26-year-old daughter committed suicide. Now, on her death certificate, and I think this is something that people should know, you're talking about chronic depression. On her death certificate, they had acute depression.
Yeah.
They didn't have suicide. Depression that became acute, although she had treatment. She was hospitalized by her own volition, and they sent her back out and exactly said to her, don't worry, be happy. They didn't realize that this is an illness,
right,
not to be ashamed of, not to attach any stigma to it. Just like that doctor said, it has to be treated, and sometimes it's really hard till you find the right way. And like I say, that beautiful young girl, she was a lab technician, took blood out of people every day at big hospitals, and yet her name was Wanda, and I always thought, in coalition with her name, WANDA, there's people with a negative, dark attitude that has to be addressed.
Yeah. And
that's what it is. And I'm just so thankful that you shared it, because people do look up to you, and they listen to you every day. And that it took a lot, and I'm not ashamed to talk about my hospitalization, because I figure I went and I got cured. I've never had to take any pills or anything afterwards. They tried to give me pills at first, and they gave me pills that I didn't even know my own name. I didn't know my kids' names. I had 2 babies at that time. I didn't know where my furniture came from, and I thought, well, this ain't right. This made me worse than I was. And sometimes they go with a regular doctor, and they give them a bag of pills, and then they take a bag of pills and try to do themselves in. So finally now, with somebody like you really talking about Robin Williams, because we loved him, and we think, how can anybody that made everybody happy be so dark and down? But it's just like I say, that there still has a stigma attached to it that is, they don't realize it is an illness just like any other illness.
Yep, and you're exactly right on that, Louise. And that's one of the things that I came to terms with, that it was an illness over which I didn't have control. And as my wife said, it shows that you're human, because that's something you have to deal with. And like we all have to deal with different things. And I've been able to come to grips with that over the years. But it took some time, because when
I know, but see, they right away they think it's a shame,
Yes.
some shame attack to it.
Right.
It's not. You have to get in your mind that this is just like any other illness, just like that doctor said. And then sometimes they just wait too long. Now, I went to seminars and stuff after my daughter's death in 1981, and they had a very high echelon guy talking, and then he said a thing like, well, this is just a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And I thought that was the most stupid thing he could say. I'm sorry. I know he was, better educated than me, but I didn't think that was any comfort to anybody who had lost a child.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, even some of the...
I don't think when you lose a child that you ever... that whole lever goes away. It might get smaller. You might be able to put it in a good place, but I don't think it ever goes away. And I'm not sure it ever should go away. But I do think that the idea is that in your daughter's case, we hope society's gotten better then, and that maybe for acute depression and the situation she had, we're not afraid to go out and seek it out now. And that's one of the reasons that I spoke today about it for my personal situation.
And I just give you kudos for that. And they are working on it, but they're not there yet.
We're not there yet, but we're trying, and I hope with people coming out and talking a little bit more about it publicly, and even in the business that I'm in, that people might understand a little bit more, and the death of Robin Williams maybe then starts to mean something, because it's not just all about, hey, things aren't going well, I'm going to take my life. There's a lot more to it in the brain. The brain is a very, very complex thing.
Right.
And Louisa, thank you so much for sharing this morning.
Like I say, I knew there was some reason why I was a friend to you all these years, my true radio friend, and now I know why.
Thank you, Louisa. I appreciate you sharing your story this morning, too.
Right.
Take care.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye. We're going to talk more about this coming back. Don't be afraid to open up. Really, it is not something where you need to be ashamed about or anything else. But, how have you, the situations you've dealt with over the years, and again, you might hold back right now and calling 1-800-357-0910, but don't. Because your story, I learned a lot just from Louisa's story there. We all have trials, and I know we all want to keep them personal, like I did. But at the same time, maybe you could help somebody else who's like her daughter, where she didn't tell anybody, and all of a sudden they come back and they find out acute depression, and no one knew. You don't want it to remain in the shadows. You don't want to remain in the darkness without knowing that there's help there for you. When we come back, Luciano in Scranton will be next up here on the Gary Sutton Show. It's 31 minutes past the hour. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Excuse me. Losing my voice there for a moment. Let's get to Luciano in Scranton. As we're talking about depression, have you dealt with... we had Dr. Herschel on this morning, who I thought was an outstanding guest. And we'll post that tomorrow at Facebook.com/910WSBA if you didn't get to hear it, or you'd like to hear it again or store it away somewhere. But talking about depression and talking about it from the standpoint that in the wake of Robin Williams' death, that it is a disease. It's not something that someone's faking. It's not something that is a weakness. It's not something that should be a stigma attached. I told you my own story a little bit earlier this morning. I'm not afraid to talk about that with you. If you'd like to ask me questions about it too, that's fine. It's 1-800-357-0910. I didn't tell you for a dig me moment. It's not something that I exactly share with a lot of people. And yet at the same time, I felt like over the years, I think we in society are trying to understand what that is. And I think to understand, again, from a person who really thought he was in control of everything in his life, and then finding out there's something that could control you if you didn't get treatment for it, is a real shocker. And that was me. And I suggest it maybe there's a lot of people out there. And there's not hopelessness. That's the one thing that a lot of people who have depression worry about, that it's hopeless. It's not. So give me a call. Two lines open, 1-800-357-0910 to Luciano in Luciano in Scranton. Forgive me. You're on the Gary Sutton Show. Luciano, go ahead. Good to have you back on.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call, Gary Sutton. Listen, let me just say I used to be homeless on the streets of California for about 15 years, unfortunately, and also my years of living homeless, suffering through bipolar manic depression. I met many, many highly educated, intelligent doctors, dentists, auto mechanics, welders, professional chefs that were living on the streets, that were bipolar, schizophrenic, multiple personalities, so you could be highly intelligent and suffer from mental illness. So I lived on the streets of Covina, Santa Monica, etc., with severe depression. Unfortunately, I met young people that committed suicide, servicemen that committed suicide, jumped off parking lots 15 feet above, and killed themselves. I've met highly intelligent, very attractive women that committed suicide because of severe manic depression, schizophrenia. I went through many years of counseling and group therapy. And what else do you want to know? It's a nice.
Well, you know, Luciano, I've thought, and I was in Washington recently, about 3-4 weeks ago, and I see a lot of people in the street, and you see people, for example, walking, talking to themselves, or you see people acting in ways that we would consider to be odd or different. And one of the things, having gone through this myself, I thought about was how sad. I mean, how unbelievably sad this is to watch people who maybe aren't getting the help that they need, or who think this is hopeless, or this is the way you have to live every day. And I'm sure you probably came across that same feeling, and probably maybe even had it yourself at times, because there is help there, and yet at the same time there are a lot of people who say, for one reason or another, I can't get that, or this is the way it's got to be. Tell me about how you kind of came out of the whole thing.
Well, actually, like I said, I went through group therapy in California, and I went to individual counseling, medication, psychiatry, the whole 9 yards. I went through holistic training. I personally went through a process, and hopefully it won't take it away from me, of many years of counseling, meditation I do now. And personally, I believe in good nutrition. I believe in prayer.
Yeah.
And I'm off medication. The dilemma is I've been on so many years of wasted like 25 years, Twilight Zone situation. Now I want to go back to work. And I believe, thank the good Lord, I'm fairly good health. I studied martial arts for many years, believe it or not, still under severe depression. So it's not that I didn't waste my life. I learned much discipline through martial arts. But I want to go back to work. Hopefully I can find me a suitable job. Like I said, I'm skilled in cooking. I was a professional cook at one time. I left that. And so in cooking and baking, I received an associate's degree. So, yes, it is. You can get cured. You can be healed. And many people can be increased, could be high. And as a matter of fact, Gary said, there are right now people that are professionally trained in many professions that are on medication, and people have not the foggiest idea that they're on medication, and they're going through psychotherapy and psychoanalysis privately and quietly. And like I said, you could be highly intelligent and be severely mentally ill. And I met many of people in the streets of California and Minnesota, and living on the streets of Philadelphia, my hometown where I was born at, that is many soldiers. Many soldiers with honorable discharge. Unfortunately, I would join the military, suffer from severe depression, and live on the streets with honorable discharge.
Well, and you look at post-traumatic stress syndrome and things like that people have to deal with. It's not weakness. And we have to understand that it is illness, and it needs to be treated like an illness and needs to be treated on a regular basis. I am so happy for you, Luciano, that you're working in the right direction. Keep on going, but you know where you came from. You know the things you've got to do when things do spring up, and you know how to get back to that. And that knowledge and that understanding of where to go is really one of the biggest parts here in having to deal with all that. And I really appreciate you sharing with us this morning. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Alan in Dallastown, we lost you. Come on back here. I want to get you in right away. I was just getting ready to come up next. So 1-800-357-0910. You've heard some really interesting stories this morning from people that really tell you it's a tough one. Louisa told you a story about it being a tough one, and the same thing here with Luciano. What about you? Have you dealt with family members? Do you see things can you get away from the idea that it's a weakness and there's some stigma attached, and that really is just a sickness? Let's go to Alan in Dallastown. Alan, great to have you back on the show. Good morning to you. Go ahead. It's your turn to make the call.
Morning, Gary. How are you?
I'm doing real well. How are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. I had something to say in relationship to what you were talking about earlier.
Go ahead.
And it's something that I've understood throughout my life, and just us behaving as men as islands. You understand? Just pretending as if we can take any amount of punishment, and exactly, and just keep on trucking on. And one of the most important factors of mentally resilient people to understand that we are not that, and that, as you said earlier, our brains are very complicated chemical interactions that they can have shortages in one direction or another, and it can put people so far out of balance. And my mother's a psychologist, and when I heard the news that Robin Williams died, I asked her, Mom, what do you think could cause someone who would seem to have everything to take his life like that? Because I understand depression like that, but I could never get to the point where I would want to take my own life. And She goes, it's one of the things that happens when you just get so far out of whack that it seems like an open option. It seems like something that isn't necessarily a bad thing. That, living in fact is worse. Living in fact is worse than the alternative, because you don't know what the alternative might be.
I talked to a psychologist one time, just kind of add to that a little bit, Alan, and I want you to go on and tell me a little bit more. And they said, addictive behavior, for example, many times is the one thing over which you have control. And when all else seems like it is out of your control, then you go to the addictive behavior where you can control something. People who have, for example, bulimia or anorexia, that's something they control, okay? And maybe even in the most extreme cases, and who knows, as the story continues to come out here on Robin Williams, maybe the one thing he felt he still had control of in his life was taking his life away, which is a terrible way to think about control, and yet that's what you're looking for. You're looking for control of your life. And I think, going back to what you said to start out with, we guys, for some reason, generally think we're kind of in control. It's our responsibility. We're generally seen as the head of the family, all those kind of things. So I just wanted to add to what you said. Go ahead. You had some other points you wanted to make.
Well, no, and I can bounce off of that too. It also brings us down even further to think that we're weak by being depressed. And another point that I would make is that this strange attitude that we seem to have towards mental health, I think it has a lot to do with the people who will go out and take the lives of a bunch of innocent people with the gun that they found in their parents' house or what have you, because it hasn't been paid attention to. Now, it's not just, these aren't really isolated instances. It's kind of like we don't seem to understand just yet how to react to mental illness. There's a wide variety of reactions to how it happens, and as you can see in stories that pop up every now and again, it has serious repercussions when it's ignored.
Well, we look at the case of like a Sandy Hook kind of thing, where the mother was taking the kid who ended up shooting those kids at the school, the teacher there, out to get help, and yet when that's eventually neglected, people can become time bombs. People can become dangerous. People can become irrational. People can. So the treatment for it as a disease is really important, because that's what it is. I think a lot of times in society, parents particularly will look at this and they will say, well, geez, I don't want my neighbors to know, because somehow they'll stay away there and we won't be friends anymore, or we won't be able to get invited to their houses anymore, all that kind of stuff. And that's the way I think it has been seen for a long, long time. And so we are afraid because of our reputations, our social standing, a host of things there that I can probably think about if I sat down and made a list. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to.
Yeah, it is. It's just that we need to accept that we are flawed inherently as humans, and that these things happen to the best of us, and that it's not a sign of weakness to admit fault. It's a sign of self-awareness. Well,
I got to tell you, it was a little bit hard for me today to say that, but I've dealt with this subject from time to time over the years, and I've always kind of felt like, geez, here I am talking about this like I know something about it, because I do know something about it, and yet I can't really tell people because, well, my boss has said, you might lose listeners or stuff like that. And I thought today, the hell with that. I don't really care about that. I care about being honest about it. And I think maybe sometimes, depending on how people see you, if you're honest about it, maybe people can say, geez, he's not afraid to talk about that. Maybe I can talk about it too. Maybe I can find some help somewhere. And that's one of the reasons I like to get people on, especially in something that has really gotten the country's attention here with Robin Williams, because he crossed all boundaries, ages and everything else. And people want to know, like you mentioned, how can someone who is so successful be out there and have those kind of feelings? And yet, the easy answer to that at the end is we don't know them. we only know the perception of them. We only know them from their entertainment of us. And one of the hardest things for people, and I mentioned this yesterday, Alan, to somebody, I said, what happens when the quiet time comes? What happens when you're off the stage? What happens when people don't see you? What happens when you have to deal with the moments where you're by yourself and you're dealing with some of those things, and people don't see that part? That's not the perception anymore. That's the reality. What's that?
That's true.
Yeah, that's the reality.
Sometimes it is in those moments where it all comes crashing down. It's, everything seems fine, everything's cruising along, and then that time to come alone, everything comes crashing down upon you, and the weight of the world's on you. And it's that mentality of trying to be an island, of trying to be just. There's no way that this can happen to me is part of what gets us so far away from the help that we need. Because if we had a positive attitude towards health, if it weren't so taboo to think that I'm weak, it might be a different climate today.
One of the things that struck me was the other day that he died alone. And that's the one thing I think for people who are having troubles with depression and other things, you don't want to be alone. Sometimes you'll still be alone amidst people, but those people will have ways of getting you to the proper help you really need. Not being afraid to call a crisis, type of thing online where it's 1-800-273-TALK. Not being afraid to do that. Not being afraid to seek out the help. And the biggest thing that they say with people who have depression, and I can tell you firsthand, it is a terrible worry, that it will never get better. And you're going to feel like that all the time. And you don't. You don't. If you go get the kind of help you need, and maybe even, the kind of drugs you need as part of the mosaic of that whole thing and getting treatment and getting better, you're going to be better off. And it's important for not just you to know that, but for the people around you, the family, the people that love you, because, it's later on you come back and you find out, like in the case of the one caller this morning, that your daughter died from severe depression and you didn't even know it. No one even, because she kept it quiet, she didn't say anything, and yet she dealt with it. That's not the way you want to see people have to go through life, because it's a terrible, terrible way to have to deal with it. So go, keep your eyes out, watch people, look out for the telltale signs. We talked about that a little bit the other day, and we can all help each other, because that's kind of the whole idea anyway, isn't it?
I agree with you completely.
Alan, great call this morning. Thanks so much, and you really gave me some good things to think about here today. Alan in Dallastown. We're going to take a break. We'll come back. We'll take more of your calls. Have you had to deal with someone with depression before? Have you dealt with it yourself? How did you as a family deal with it? What can you add to the conversation to help people feel better about the fact that it is a disease? It is not a weakness. It's not some kind of cop-out. It's nothing like that. There's much more to it than that. 1-800-357-0910. When we have someone with cancer, we have someone with diabetes, something like that, we don't say that's a weakness. We say it's a disease. Let's treat it. Let's help make it better. Let's help get rid of it to the extent that we can. That's the way you have to look at depression. We'll be right back on the Gary Sutton Show. Lines are open for you. 1-800-357-0910 on News Radio 910 WSBA. Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. We've spent a lot of time on talking about depression this morning in the wake of Robin Williams' death this week, and a lot of people are doing that out on social media right now, but I just caught an article, and I wanted to share it with you to kind of close out the show today, at least partially. And it says Robin Williams' death reminded us that that depression does not discriminate between the rich and famous and the rest of us, and that it is not something that people can simply snap out of. And that's been one of the problems over the years. People thought you could snap out of this. It was some kind of temporary thing that, it's just a moment of weakness. You can do something about it. Well, you can do things about it, but it's something that you can deal with. It goes on to say many sufferers have taken to social media in the wake of the actor's apparent suicide to talk of their experiences and remind people that help is available. The Samaritans was one of several charities urging anyone feeling down or alone to speak out. Catherine Johnstone, the chief executive of this group called the Samaritans, said, quote, "We know that when a person is in crisis and struggling to cope, they feel trapped in their situation with no way out and that the future holds nothing good for them. They may not be able to see beyond their situation and truly believe that suicide is the only option for them. The service we offer provides a safe space for people to be themselves and talk about their problems without fear of being judged," unquote. And, I thought about those words. And then there was this piece that was posted by a guy named Jason Manford that dealt with this. It said, "If you feel alone and down, anxious and low, if you feel deep sadness but can't find a root cause, if people tell you to snap out of it or things can only get better or what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, know that it's simply not always true. Sometimes it does kill you. Please seek help. No one will think you're being melodramatic, I swear. No one will think you're silly or wasting people's time. No one will say, what? But you're always so happy. Maybe you're just having a bad day. For some people, every day is a bad day, and they get through it. But sometimes they stop getting through it. If depression can allegedly kill Robin Williams, one of the world's greatest funny men, well, it can get any of us at any time. If the genie from Aladdin can suffer and the DJ in Good Morning Vietnam can be affected by it, then you can too. And your child or friend or work colleague can as well. I always remind myself of the quote from Watchmen. Quote, man goes to doctor, says he's depressed, says life is harsh and cruel, says he feels all alone in a threatening world. Doctor says treatment is simple. The great clown Pagliacci is in town tonight. Go see him. That should pick you up. Man bursts into tears, says, but doctor, I am Pagliacci. Please ask for help. If you have no one, or if you don't want to tell them, ring a place like Crisis, where we talked about the other day, which is 1-800-273-TALK, 1-800-273-TALK, and you can get help. They talk here about this Samaritans group. Ring Samaritans on 08457 909090 for someone to talk to, or talk to your doctor. Yeah. The world needs you. If you don't think it does, I promise we need you here now. This is from a post by Jason Manford. Williams had been suffering from severe depression in recent weeks, and he made no secret of a decades-long struggle with cocaine and alcohol abuse. Those are not the ways to get out of that, by the way, as we heard Dr. Urschel talk about this morning. Officials said all evidence indicates that he committed suicide, and that is sad. But that should be a teaching tool for us that we can help, that all of us can do better, that it is not something that you have to suffer through forever, that there is good times on the other side. And I can tell you, as I mentioned this morning about my own situation, that there is an upside. You may not recognize that person that's going through depression in that moment, and it may feel hopeless, and it may feel helpless, and it might even feel permanent. But I will tell you that from the day that I dealt with this, I guess 14 years ago now, and I crawled in my brother's car that day when he came to pick me up from the place that I had gone to on my own, because I wanted to find out what was wrong and what was seriously wrong at that point, and knew that I was at a real bad place. Not suicide, but at a bad place, that this is not the way that I wanted to live my life. I remember how happy I was to see my brother that day. My brother died 3 years ago, and I still miss him terribly. But I remember seeing him that day, and I couldn't wait to get in the car. And I said, I've seen the concrete foundation of life. I've seen the basement. I know what it looks like, and I know what it feels like. And I don't want to live in the basement. I want to live upstairs. I want to live in a way that people should live. I want to be looking forward. And no matter what I do, as I go forward on this journey, and I hate to use the word journey because I hear it overused all the time, but it is a journey. It's a trip. It's life. I don't want to be dependent on this kind of life. I don't want to be going back and having to deal with this blackness. I want to find the right way. Well, I had people that helped me during that time. I went to a psychologist for a while. Great help. I still go to a psychiatrist once like every 3 or 4 or 5 months, and just talk for a moment about different things. I do use some medication to help because I do have a shortage of that. It does run in my family. That's not an out. That's not a cop-out. That's a fact. Those are facts that we all have to deal with. As we deal with maladies in our life, there are people who are dealing with cancers. I have a great friend right now who's dealing with Lou Gehrig's disease. We have to go seek out the help to help us to live the very best quality life that we humanly can. And to hide away from that because we're afraid what society might say, to feel like someone might scorn us, to feel like we need the approval of someone else. That's not what we want to do. We need to come out and go and deal with it. And then ask others to help us, including our families, our loved ones, our wives, our sons, our daughters, our cousins, our aunts, our uncles. And believe me, as you heard Nate talk about, you'll learn. Because love, if it is truly love, will soak all of that in. And that'll become part of the love. As my wife told me, proves you're human. You got to deal with some of those things. Some quotes today I'd leave you with. One from Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, great poet, who said, "Every man has his secret sorrows, which the world knows not. And oftentimes we call a man cold when he's only really just sad." Hope you've enjoyed the show today. Hope you learned something from it. We thank Dr. Herschel and so many people that called in today and shared their stories. We look forward to tomorrow here on the Gary Sutton Show. It'll be What's Your Mind Friday. We'll give you a chance to talk about whatever you're talking about, the Main Street. Of course, Clark Hodges joins us tomorrow morning at 9:05. Dr. Nick Pandelitis will be with us, and so many more guests. We look forward to tomorrow with you here on the Gary Sutton Show. Have a great day. It's high noon.